Hi folks, welcome to our community ecology video. This is our chance to figure out all of the important stuff that the College Board thinks you should know, and I do too. Warning, there's graphic images coming up, so brace yourselves. Here we go. So here's our first image. We're out on the savannah. There's a lion here that has clearly killed a zebra. We've got some buzzards here, it looks like, that are coming in. We've got a hyena in the background. There are all kinds of ecological relationships happening here in this one picture. And we're going to try and take apart some of those as we go through this presentation. Probably the biggest thing we've got going on here, though, is we've got a predator-prey relationship, which drives a whole lot of biology. So we're going to talk about that a little more in a few minutes. But there's also a whole bunch of competition going on, and competition also drives a whole lot of things in biology. Now, this is sort of a silly competition that happens in Gloucestershire, England every year. They roll a wheel of cheese down the hill, and a bunch of idiots try and be the first one to get down the hill and beat the cheese down the hill or catch the cheese. So they are in competition for the cheese, and animals are in competition for the metaphorical cheese, I guess. So really important as we start talking about community ecology to discuss the niche. And a niche really is just everything that an animal is and does. It's everything it eats. It's where it poops. It's where it gets its water. It's where it sleeps at night. It's the role that it fills in the environment. And a lot of people will refer to a niche as an animal's job in the environment. And one of the things that's really important in AP biology and all biology is to realize that in any given ecosystem, no two organisms can fill the exact same niche. It's just not possible. One of them has to shift a little bit to some other slightly different niche. Maybe they take on a slightly different food source, or they start living somewhere else, or they get their water somewhere else, but they can't occupy the same niche because one will always outcompete the other. And that's where that competition piece comes in. And the other's going to have to change a little bit, or they're not going to be in that environment anymore. So here's a great example of that. I'm sure you've heard of the finches in the Galapagos Island. Darwin studied them. We'll talk about them more later on. But if you look at these two finches, the big deal with finches is beak depth, and beak depth really indicates what type of food these finches are going to be eating, whether they're going to be eating berries or insects or bird seeds, that sort of stuff. So if you look when these two different finches live on separate islands, you can see that their numbers indicate that they basically have the same beak depth, right? Which probably indicates that they're eating the same types of foods on these separate islands. However, if they're not on Los Hermanos or Daphne, if they're on Santa Maria or San Cristobal, in those places, these two live together in the same environment. And because of that, what I just told you, they can't occupy the same niche, so they've both shifted, and their beak depths indicate that they probably moved on to some other food source over time, and that has affected the overall evolution of those organisms or adaptation of those organisms on these islands. And that's pretty interesting. So when they live together, they have different beak depths on average, and when they live apart, they basically have the same. And that's all about exploiting a certain food source and then adapting to a new food source over the course of lots of generations. Same sort of idea here with barnacles. I know, super exciting, but if you look here, we have our brown barnacles here that have a niche. They can live here all the way from low tide up to the high tide line. The blue barnacles, they can't. They can only live about 2/3 of the way up, and when they're together, look what happens. These barnacles just simply outcompete these barnacles in the range that they can survive in. So they're here and they're not up here because they can't survive there anyways. So that leaves this area for these brown barnacles to be able to survive. Same idea. So back to our picture here, we've got, like I said, we've got our predator-prey relationship going on. We've got a scavenger relationship going on with these vultures or buzzards or whatever they are coming in. And then we've got this hyena back here. There's some more relationships going on between these birds and the hyenas probably because the hyenas most likely actually use the birds to find some prey because when they're circling, they know there's something dead, and the hyenas are scavengers. So lots of evolutionary relationships going on. Want to talk about some of the reasons why predator-prey relationships are so important in community ecology. And the main reason is that it drives evolutionary change in a lot of ways. So if you want to think about camouflage, for example, this bird really blends in well to its surroundings. Guess why? Because predators aren't going to be able to catch the ones that look like this, so more of them end up being born that look like this, particularly when they're young. I think that's a juvenile. Same thing over here with this. This is a horny toad. It blends in really well, and in this case, it's because it's a predator and wants to be able to catch insects and things like that. Back here, we've got our zebra. Long stripes helps it blend in the grasslands. And then we've got this buff color on the lion, which is going to allow it to blend into the savanna as well. Same sorts of ideas. Other evolutionary pushes that we get from predator-prey relationships. If you're a predator that eats amphibians, you're probably going to not eat things that are bright because bright colors tend to indicate poison, particularly in amphibians. So don't lick this one or eat it, okay? This is a really great example of mimicry. This is a moth that has giant eye spots that have nothing to do with being able to see. Its eyes are up here, but these eye spots make it look like something much bigger than it is, and if a bird came along, it might think twice about going after this little moth because maybe it's going to just get a flash of the eye spots and keep going on its way. That's mimicry. Another example of mimicry that's really cool is this caterpillar that when it gets scared, it kind of lashes out and its head gets really big and it looks an awful lot like a snake, which if you're a bird, you're probably going to shy away from. This is one of my favorites. These things are everywhere. They're around us. They're all over the place. And I just want you to look at these three pictures and I want you to pick out the one that can sting you, because there's only one that will sting you. If you picked the one in the middle, you are correct. That's a wasp. The others are actually moths. So, and what's happened over time is these things evolutionarily, the ones that looked a little more like a wasp survive better because birds know that if they eat a wasp, they might get stung. So they're going to shy away from eating wasps sometimes, which is going to help the ones that look a little tiny bit more like a wasp survive. And over the course of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of generations, we end up with moths that look almost exactly like wasps, but they're completely harmless and they can't sting you. Mimicry. It's fantastic. Some other examples of evolutionary relationships. So now we're off from predator-prey, and we're going to jump into examples of symbiotic relationships. And there's three of them that you really need to know about. One is right here. This is one of my favorite animals. It is the emerald jewel wasp, and it is a great parasite. What it does is it stings a cockroach in two places in its brain, basically zombifies it, and then guides it into a burrow, blocks it in only after laying its eggs inside of the cockroach, which will then eat their way out of the zombified cockroach and emerge. If you're interested in the emerald jewel wasp, and you probably should be, you can click the link there. I'll make this available to you, and you can read more about it. And there's a Wired magazine article about it. There's also all kinds of YouTube stuff. So emerald jewel wasp, emerald cockroach wasp, called both things, but really cool. Other examples, so we had that was parasitism, right? Now we have this thing called mutualism. Mutualism is where both organisms end up happy. They both get something out of the relationship. Obviously, in parasitism with the emerald jewel wasp, the parasite is benefiting and the host is not benefiting. So it's not going to be happy. That would be a happy face and a sad face. Here we have two happy faces. Really common example of this sort of relationship would be any sort of pollinator and the flower it pollinates. The pollinator gets some nectar, which is what it needs to survive, and the pollinatee, the flower, gets its pollen spread, and that way the flower gets to reproduce. So that's a really great mutualistic example. We also have some animal-animal examples, like this alligator and this bird. This seems pretty precarious for the bird, but the alligator is getting his teeth cleaned and the bird is getting some food. They're both happy. It's mutualism. Fantastic. The last relationship that I want to talk about is commensalism. And I have a question mark here because there are lots of people in this world who will say that commensalism doesn't really exist. So that there's always going to be some effect, positive or negative, on both organisms. So for example, I've got this gazelle here, and this gazelle has a spider that's weaved a web in between its horns. And at first glance, we're thinking, okay, this gazelle isn't going to be weighed down at all by this, and it's not going to stop it from eating or drinking or anything like that. It's probably not even aware that it's there. Great. So the spider's benefiting because it's got a web that can move around and catch lots of bugs, and the gazelle is neither helped nor harmed. Sure, maybe. But what if this makes this gazelle less attractive to mates? Well, if that's the case, then the gazelle is hurt because it's not going to be able to reproduce as well because of something the spider's doing. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about where a lot of people will say that commensalism doesn't actually exist because there's always a negative or positive effect on each of the organisms that are in the relationship. So those are our symbiotic relationships: parasitism, mutualism, commensalism. Commensalism. Is that even real? I'm not sure. Another idea that's really important in community ecology is the idea of the keystone species. A keystone species is a species that if you took it out of the environment, a whole waterfall effect would happen, and that ecosystem might fail because of the absence of that species. An example of that is sea stars in a coral reef. They're a really important part of the coral reef, and if you were to remove them as the keystone species, that whole environment, that whole ecosystem would have a hard time recovering, and would have a hard time finding something that fills this niche. Though there is theory that anytime a keystone species is lost, it's going to be replaced by another keystone species. Same idea as like an apex predator in an environment is always going to be replaced by another apex predator. Lastly, I just want to connect this to one of the big ideas from AP Biology, and that's energy and matter, because energy and matter is all around us. It's really important. And it's important for you to realize that all of these relationships are present in an ecosystem in the service of energy and matter, because everything is trying to hoard both of those things as much as possible. So that's why predators are preying on other creatures. That's why we end up having certain things survive because they match the environment better and camouflage better. Everything that's alive is trying to get as much energy and convert it into matter as possible. They just have different ways of going about it. So, hope this helps. See you soon. Have a great day. Come with questions.